This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
I got like a really interesting piece of what I call good news. It's an old case out of Florida, and I sent this over to you. Did you see what I sent?
Yes.
This one is, like, when I say old, this is a 1996 case, and I noticed it because, well, I got a press release, and I think it linked me to. I think it did link me immediately to a press conference or a link for it. I did listen in. I listened in live. But what got my attention was that it started with a big number, and I don't always see those.
Yeah, that's what got my attention too.
It said 10,097 days after her body was found, police announce arrest and murder of 31-year-old Jacksonville mother. So this is the case of Valerie Ames. Valerie Ames was stabbed to death back in August of 1996. Her body was found on August 10th of 1996. And here's sort of the gist of that. Nearly 28 years after the body of a 31-year-old Jacksonville mother was found inside an apartment, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office said it has arrested the man accused of killing her. Now, this comes from Travis Gibson, writing for news4jax.com. That's just news for JAX out of Jacksonville. Sheriff T.K. Waters said Tuesday Jerry Phillips, 69 years old, had been accused of second-degree murder and sexual battery in the death of Valerie Ames. Sheriff Waters said that Phillips' arrest was a result of both dogged investigative work and advancements in technology, but he didn't elaborate. He said the murder wasn't random. He did not give a lot of details about how these two knew each other in the press conference. But this is a quote from the article and from the press conference. Phillips' arrest stands as a shining symbol of our agency's commitment to methodically working with law enforcement partners to seek justice for victims, no matter how long achieving that justice takes. Now, Ames was the mother of two young daughters. They were 5 and 9 at the time of their mother's murder. The two girls and their grandmother had gone over to England when they received a phone call informing them about her death. The daughters are speaking out now. Michelle James is one of the daughters, and she spoke out right after the announcement. She said that holidays, birthdays, graduations, weddings, the birth of her 6 grandchildren all passed by without her. Those long years have done nothing to numb the pain of her non-existence. Her pain and her torture have all become our pain and torture daily. Standing there today, almost 28 years later, we now have some answers on our beautiful mother, Valerie, and she's finally reached her chance to have justice. She thanked Project Cold Case for finally giving her family the name of the monster who is accused of taking her mother's life. Phillips was arrested in North Carolina. And, you know, it's interesting that it's like this much later. And I do wonder, like, if it's, you know, I'm assuming it's DNA from the scene based on the charges. But it was a stabbing death. She was stabbed and beaten. Anyways, there's one more case in that avalanche. But, you know.
Well, if it is DNA, right?
If it is.
I tried to look because it doesn't say it outright, but I guess that's something that will come out, you know, as he goes through facing these charges, whether he pleads guilty or not guilty. I guess it is a situation where they could have had a witness show up or they could have had a confession. But without carefully looking at it, I would say, like, this has got to be one of those gotcha cases, right?
I think that it is. I've seen so on the anniversary of her stuff over time, I've seen little, blurbs about her case. And it's I remember seeing something as far back as 2010, but more recently I don't think a lot of podcasters have covered her case. I've seen where it'll come up on the actual news and they'll just say it's the X anniversary of the case of a young mother found stabbed and beaten in her Jacksonville apartment. We're to the point now where I think there's a little bit of wait and see that comes with it, where you're waiting to see how they got there. But this one feels like they did some serious work, and I hope that turns out to be the case. It's a long time, and that number, the 10,000 number, stood out to me when I was looking at it. I was like, wow, that's a strange way to count the days, but it is oh so true for so many cases and so many families. 10,097 days. That's
a lot of days.
Yep. But I don't have anything on this right now. When it comes back up and we see some court actions, he's not been indicted yet. I don't know much about how quickly Florida indicts down there. So we'll see what happens with him. I did see the mugshot. He looked a little surprised to be there.
I don't, and I say this kind of off the cuff, but I feel at least okay saying it. I don't feel like I'm completely kicking myself in the mouth, but it is unlikely for a case that happened 10,098 days ago, the body was found a long time ago. It's unlikely that there's going to be a wrongful arrest.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to try and move. Yeah, I think they feel like they've got something to move forward. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, because, if a case, because it's my opinion that once you miss if you miss the window of time and without some sort of new light on evidence, like a DNA match, which is pretty definitive in my opinion. There are circumstances that could be persuaded otherwise, but for the most part, if you've waited this long, it's going to be even worse to arrest the wrong person.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. She'd be 59 years old if she were still alive as we were recording this. He would have been 41 at the time that he attacked her. She was 31 when she died. And he stabbed her to death in a vacant home in Jacksonville, Florida. And he was arrested in Johnston County, North Carolina. I think I've got all that right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so you saw that it was a sexual assault, stabbing and beating death, right?
Correct, I did.
Okay, and so to me, that's DNA, right?
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, I think it's going to be DNA. Anytime you're using that kind of close-up weapon, or
the sexual assault part is
right.
What I'm saying.
Well, it's a battery charge. That can just be a touching. Battery doesn't have to necessarily include the fluids you would typically think of. Is my point. Battery can be just touching someone in a manner that's meant to gratify. But it's a second-degree murder. And that's interesting because a stabbing second-degree murder, I guess it wasn't premeditated, is what they
It's a snap situation.
Okay, well,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
You could speculate a lot here, but there's no point in really doing that. She was killed in a vacant apartment.
Yeah.
And she had been beaten and stabbed, and I've read she was sexually assaulted. No,
there's a charge. You're right. There's a charge.
Okay. And to me, there's only so many things that are definitively going to link a murder victim as being sexually assaulted without further evidence or a witness or whatever. Right?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, yes.
Okay, because you could have a pretty bad assault and it not be a sexual assault, right?
Correct.
Okay, so to me, I hope this is DNA evidence. I hope, it was probably genetic genealogy and they finally got the link they needed. And these cases, I can't even say it enough. it's going to get, I mean, I don't think I'll ever be uninterested, but it's going to get to a certain point where nobody's going to be surprised. But to me, if it is in fact DNA that linked him, this is a gotcha case. That is part of our avalanche.
Well, I did. So I found a Jerry Phillips who has a criminal record in North Carolina that seems to kind of match up with what's happening here. And it's interesting because it's really only drunk driving charges at this point. But
well, a lot of times in this type of situation, it's not going to be where this is a serial killer, right?
no, yeah, no. I was
had
thinking
some sort of confrontation.
that's what I was wondering, is if we'll find other potential battery situations with other victims, or if it'll be.
He probably deeply regretted it, which is the case in a lot of situations, especially these rage-filled, which, stabbing and beating, that's rage, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time, people don't walk around enraged for a significant amount of time. And so once that rage is gone, they're no longer enraged, and there's regret and remorse for what was done while they were enraged. And, I'm not a psychologist and I can't explain it, but it's something just about everybody experiences. Most of us are lucky enough not to snap and, hurt somebody.
Yeah.
Unless, well, one thing is, I feel like they'll be able to match him to anything else he's done as far as CODIS is concerned. But other than that, the way the case sets itself up, it's an encounter that went wrong for one reason or another, and it was a very enraged murder. And he probably, whenever he was no longer enraged, really, really regretted it. I don't know for sure. I'm just kind of going off of everything I've absorbed from different cases over the years. I am very glad that they were able to identify the perpetrator in her murder, and maybe now her daughters will be able to move. I mean, I don't know that you could ever really get over something like that, but it has to have some sort of sense of relief to know who the person was that killed your mother, right?
I would think so. I think it's different depending on who you are and when it occurred and all of that. But I think that everyone can get some sense of finality, whether it's closure or not. I don't know, but I'm interested to see how this shakes out. I see cases like this where they throw a second-degree murder out there, and I think a lot of those end in plea deals. That's not always the case. If something else happens, I will be glad to come back and if there's something really interesting about this, I would cover him if there's more crimes, or if he's found out to have done something of interest where it's more than just news. But he could show up in the news items again, depending on how this plays out.
I think a lot of murders that require rage, they're not people just shooting at other people. I think a lot of those are second degree type murders.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Yes.
And the other thing is, it's a different, I mean, I hate to say lower standard, but, sometimes a first degree murder is not going to be good for trial, right? With evidence that you have.
Yeah.
And so sometimes a second degree murder is what they feel like the evidence shows. And, there's all kinds of varying degrees. In cases like this, I don't feel like their encounter was ever meant, it wasn't like he plotted this out and was like, I'm going to kill her. And maybe he did. I don't know. But just sort of the way that the case I've seen the case, to me, I mean, it fits, I think. We'll see. I do think he'll probably plea out. Every single time we hit one of these cases, especially if it's DNA involved, and the person pleads, we don't find anything else out. Have you noticed?
Yeah. I follow a lot of cases where that at some point in the coverage dies off because there's not anything being released, and the person's not talking, and the investigators have no reason to talk, and the prosecution's wrapped it all up. I follow a lot of cases like that where you either are on a mission if you're going to find anything, or you're just going to leave it alone.
Right.
I follow a lot of multiple people homicides that are all in the same family units in some way or another. And those are the ones, and I know I've mentioned this before, those are the ones that, like, if you don't go digging, you will never know what actually happened. And I do that. I do go digging in those because I sometimes wonder if they get that wrong. This type of case, though, you're right. If he pleads out and doesn't talk to anyone, it might be it. We might just find out his sentence.
Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately, historically, that is where most cases I've seen like this would be headed.
Yeah. I had, I don't have much more on him. Do you have anything else on this, on her?
No,
I'm
glad
glad
that they've
made an
resolved it.
arrest. Yeah, I'm glad they made an arrest there. I started covering this case back in 2023. And you ever read something or like look at a case and like it feels super familiar, even though like what you're reading is kind of brand new?
All the time.
So this one's it's now becoming less similar, but I figured I would bring up this case and then talk about a case that has some more resolution to it than this one.
Do you ever find it odd how, to some extent, the human experience is going to be the same for people, right?
Yeah.
To some extent. And if you look into like a lot of crime cases, murder cases, missing people's cases, have you found over the years that it's very strange how there's only so many ways things go?
Yes. You mean in terms of like the number of outcomes are limited to like, even if there's something crazy that happens, it really never gets past like 7. Like it's like there's 5 things that can happen. There's a couple of things that like we never thought of.
Right. And no matter how many twists and turns happen, like at the end of the day, there's only so many ways these stories are going to play out.
Correct.
Right? There are like very few anomalies that really surprise us.
I
right?
agree. Yeah.
And I try not to let it. And for the most part, I'm still very interested in most cases we cover because otherwise I wouldn't cover them. As far as you can always kind of tell like what happened.
This case, at first I wasn't really sure like what I was reading. I was kind of like, what happened here? This is from February of 2023. And I don't know if you follow this. This is out of Virginia. I followed it because I genuinely was like curious what happened. It's a multiple homicide with a lot of like weird moving parts. And when I first pulled it up, I sort of looked at it and I went, that feels like something I remember reading about. And the more I've learned, the less like that it is. But this is a really interesting case, and there's a really interesting like tie to something else here. So I did want to talk about this one.
I know what you mean. And interestingly, so this is one of the cases we're going to talk about it, and there's really nothing wrong with us talking about it. But it's almost where you want to be like, yeah, don't say that. You don't want to give anybody any ideas, right?
Right. So my idea here was that if we talk about this case, then I can tell you my thoughts on it by talking about the other case.
Yeah, that's fine.
Without giving any defense attorneys ideas. Because there's already so many weird things happening. Our sources for this are the New York Post. There are multiple articles on NBC related to this, and you can find this is a salacious case. So there are these
I believe
weird.
there is just a probable cause finding too, so it's right in the news.
Yeah. This should be by the time this airs, there'll be several things going on related to it court-wise, so people will be able to follow it. Here's how NBC, of all places, NBC Washington laid this out. And unfortunately, there's no writers connected to this. It's just all attributed to staff. So I'm not crediting people. I'm just not able to. Okay, here's how it starts off. Around 7:30 a.m. on February 24th of 2023, Juliana Perez Megales left the Banfield Stablebrook home with a little girl. And this is according to detectives' probable cause statements. Now, Juliana Perez Megales is a 23-year-old. She's going to tell police in interviews that she doubles back to the home because she forgot to grab lunches that had been packed for her and his kid. So she is the caregiver for a family. The little girl that she takes care of is 4 years old. And her mom's name is Christine. And her dad's name is Brendan, the 4-year-old girl's dad. But Juliana Perez Megales is the family's nanny or au pair. I don't know what the phrasing would be. And the idea is that Juliana Perez Megales, she's a Brazilian-born au pair or nanny or domestic employee.
I believe
so
that
she lives in this home.
I believe that when there's a cult, like if somebody comes from a different country to be a nanny, I think that's when they call them an au pair, but I'm not entirely sure.
Oh, well, there you go.
And since she's from Brazil, technically, and she's a nanny, technically she would be an au pair, right?
There you go. She has taken this 4-year-old girl with her, forgets these lunches, and she doubles back around. She's going to go inside and pick up their lunches. And she sees a car that she doesn't recognize. So she calls the mom, Christine. And mom doesn't answer. So then she calls the dad, Brendan, and he comes right over. It appears he was either on his way to work or at work. Whatever he was doing, he comes home. So then, at this point, Brendan, the dad, Juliana, and the little girl, they all go into the house. Dad goes upstairs to a bedroom, and he finds Christine and a man that they say they don't know. The way it was initially labeled was this was all a mysterious series of events, but now I'm giving you a version that has a little more detail to it. The cops say that Brendan and Juliana saw this man attacking Christine. And that prompted Brendan, so the dad, Brendan Banfield, to fire his weapon at the man. Now, Brendan just happens to be a law enforcement officer for the IRS. Whoever this man is allegedly has no connection to the family or to the home other than this incident. Detectives are going to have to go hunting to figure out how he has allegedly found this woman, Christine Banfield. After they shoot him, they discover that Christine Banfield has been stabbed multiple times. So Christine and this man both die. This man turns out to be a 39-year-old man named Joseph Ryan. Now, I haven't seen a ton about him yet. Have you?
No. And unfortunately, there's a pretty big speculative association with a different case that comes up immediately when you put in Joseph Ryan, because that's the name of the third husband of Lori Vallow Daybell.
Yeah.
And so that's what you get if you Google search it. So I haven't even seen this guy.
The detectives have no idea how this guy got here, and they take over all the technology in the home, meaning computers, iPads, phones, and they are starting to look for how Christine and Joseph met each other. And a search of the computer that was shared in the family home led them to a fetish website that catered to sexual fantasies, including more alternative lifestyles from like traditional situations, BDSM, kinks, etc. And they find a profile for Christine Banfield. Not only that, they find communications between her profile and Joseph Ryan. But the more they dig, the more they realize that something in the profile doesn't make any sense. They go through a lot of correspondence between Christine Banfield and her family and friends, and they have a lot of interviews with her family and friends. And what the profile communications are seem to be vastly different than the Christine Banfield that everybody knows and talks about. Now, that is not always a red flag per se, because people can very distinctly, I think of like the Murdaugh. Like that guy was clearly dividing his life in half. There was a light side and a dark side. Regardless of whether you think he's a killer or not, you have to look at it from the perspective that he clearly had a lot going on from how honest he was with his law partners and his family and all the people around him. So he had this secondary persona. But police started to believe that it was someone else who had been acting as Christine on this profile and communicating with Joseph Ryan. And that person had set up a meetup at the family's home on this particular day in February 2023. It's going to take them a while to investigate that. In fact, it's going to be 8 months later. And they arrest Juliana, the au pair or the nanny, and they charge her with second-degree murder in the death of Joseph Ryan. So that's where this starts. Now, there's a quote on NBC from the Fairfax County Police Chief, a guy named Kevin Davis. He says, "I suspected from the very beginning, and then I went to the scene of that double murder, that there was going to be a lot of twists and turns in this investigation." And this is March. He's saying the twists and turns are still going. He said, "It's my expectation that we will eventually be able to hold more than just one person accountable for this crime." So they have a theory, and they've laid this theory out in hearings in court in 2024, so a year later. The theory that they have, the prosecutors believe that Brendan Banfield and Juliana Perez Nogales were having an affair. They don't, at this point in time, accuse Brendan Banfield of being a part of this particular plan. But they haven't not said it, if that makes sense. So they're stopping short. They're walking right up to the idea that Brendan Banfield may or may not be in on this. They have certainly grilled Brendan about the events leading up to his wife's death. But as of right now, in April of 2024, no one is currently charged in Christine's death. They presented evidence early or late in March that they argue shows that Brendan and Juliana were going and doing things together in the months before the murders, including at least one visit to a shooting range. I thought that was interesting that they would go to a shooting range.
There's a really interesting point here about Brendan Banfield. Brendan actually, he has refused to speak with police.
Oh, I'll say it this way. It says in the NBC article that Brendan has been grilled about the events leading up to his wife's death. I don't know if they're saying that the police did that or if the prosecutors did that in court.
That could be it, especially because I do know that they had a lot of questions for him during the hearing that he pled the fifth to. And that he had, and his attorney made it very clear that he had no intention to say anything except to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights. And the judge ruled that they would decide on a case-by-case basis as he was questioned because the prosecutor had the right to question him. And so they laid stuff out. I don't know if this is the right time to really say it or not, but this is a huge indication of the difference between talking to the police and not talking to the police.
It absolutely is, because even if he had denied everything, he would have been arrested, probably.
I can tell you that from what I've seen, Juliana she gave, for one thing, she called 911, right? The other thing is Brendan was on the 911 call at some point, and so they do have that information. But they were able to use the information that Juliana gave them to basically, they used that as like her side of the story, not to mention she did talk to the police. But, they're saying at this point that it doesn't line up in an evidentiary way. And so essentially they're discrediting her account of it. And then that adds to the suspicion, right?
Yeah.
And then because the evidence suggests one thing and she's saying a different thing.
Right.
I know that on the 911 call, for whatever reason, the husband says he shot him, and then so each of them shot him once, right?
Right.
She's been charged with murder. He has not.
Yeah. So, okay. Right now, the way this works out is the prosecutors are showing that in the months leading up to this, Brendan and Juliana had gone to the shooting range together. And right before the killings happened, Brendan bought a gun. And I'm assuming he has potentially a service weapon as well. So I think they're indicating there are two guns, but let's roll out what they say here. Juliana, like you said, she tells detectives that Brendan shot Ryan first, but he was still alive. She explained that Brendan told her to get the gun he purchased at the shooting range and to shoot Ryan again. She told police that then she shot him again. The lawyers here are saying that both Juliana and Brendan swapped out their phones for brand new ones just ahead of the attacks, like upgraded their phones. So when you do that, you're losing data from the phone that's gone. So October is when she gets arrested. Now we're in court. Detectives, like leading up to her arrest, they went back to the home and they went through it. I don't know if it's for a visit or a search warrant or what they're doing, but they were able to get a lot of interesting photos that came in as evidence here. Some of that evidence is that, and I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to, Juliana took Christine's place. There are picture frames that have, photos of them of Brendan Banfield and with Juliana. They found her lingerie around the room, and they refer to her in paperwork as his girlfriend / live-in lover. So the prosecution's theory is the killings were part of an elaborate plan so that Brendan and Juliana could live their lives or life without Christine in the picture, literally. She says that they weren't having an affair. But this is one of those things where you have to look at the timing of it all. Prosecutors are saying that she's lying and that these pictures prove that there was something going on because she had pictures on the nightstand of the two of them. Now, they get Brendan up to try and clear everything, and all he does is, like you said, invoke his Fifth Amendment right because he doesn't want to be answering questions that might incriminate him. Michael Linder, who's the judge in this case in Fairfax County, he called him an adverse witness, but he said that his opinion was that the prosecutor was using this hearing to play Brendan and Juliana against each other to try and suss out the rest of the prosecution's theory. Now, Juliana has an attorney that shows up here, Ryan Campbell, and he says there's no way to tell which shot killed Joseph Ryan. And it looks like he's going to try and say that Brendan is actually responsible for Ryan's death. And he said that them dragging Brendan on the stand is proof that his client is sort of being used and that Brendan Banfield is really the target of the investigation. He's just not cooperating. Now, to be completely clear, and this could change from the time that we're sitting here recording this, and if it does, I'll try and put a tag at the beginning or whatever. Brendan Banfield isn't charged when they have this hearing. Now, the case against Juliana is moving forward. The judge said there was some probable cause. Her attorneys had argued that whatever shooting went on was in self-defense. And in April, of 2024, there will be a grand jury that's convened in this case. And the idea will be that that grand jury, because of the way Virginia grand juries work, it could end up charging both of them. And that's sort of where this one stands right now. It's salacious because of this whole lure. Like, how did they find this guy and lure him to this house? And like, you know, that's the allegation that's being thrown around right now. And, you know, I don't totally understand what they're going to allege. It looks pretty, in my opinion, it looks pretty simple, doesn't it?
From whose perspective?
Well, from the perspective of, if Christine's not talking to this guy and they can somehow prove that, like, if I'm a prosecutor in this case, I'm wanting to line up like the dates and times of the conversations with Joseph Ryan to prove at least one or two times where Christine's not in the house. That's what I would want to do. So then you have to say, okay, who in the house would have been home at that time who could have sent these messages? So if you've got Brendan at work and Christine's gone, and you can prove that Juliana is sending messages with Joseph Ryan, I think you have a better idea of a murder charge for her.
Possibly.
Brendan could still come back into the mix because he could have been urging her on. But if she's the only one home and she's having conversations with Joseph Ryan that are luring him there, like he's going to meet Christine, I think that's more telling. I think that's the part that's simple.
Right, but luring, pretending to be your boss, essentially, to set up something, it may be illegal, actually, in a variety of ways, but I don't know that that's going to be enough to connect her to murder. We have this really interesting situation here. So, you know, the times are pretty precise for whatever reason. We've got a hookup supposedly happening before 7:31 a.m. when the nanny has diverted from her plans for the day and come back to the house to pick up lunches that she forgot.
Right.
We have no idea how far she got away from the house. We don't know what time she left the house. This had to have been a heck of a hookup, right? To be happening like on a weekday. And so it's a Friday.
So it's a 7 a.m. on Friday hookup. Okay, let me just ask you this. So the original plan, no matter what happened, somehow there was going to be like a tryst, like a rendezvous that happened between Christine and Joseph Ryan. Forget who's playing what part right now. Somehow Joseph Ryan gets to the house and appears to be under the impression that he is there to do something with Christine at 7:30 on a Friday.
In the morning.
In the morning. Well, and we have a record of that.
Right. And I guess it has to be before then, because I think she got back to the house at 7:31. And she saw a strange car there and she didn't go inside. And so that's weird, right?
Yeah.
She couldn't have possibly been gone that long. I mean, I don't know how far away the zoo was or whatever, but like, I'm thinking she didn't leave earlier than like 7 o'clock with a 4-year-old. Like, why would you do that to yourself? So you've got a situation where the timing is wonky as far as that goes. It doesn't really matter. To me, a 7 a.m. hookup for a 37-year-old mom on a Friday morning, and especially since it was this fetish, like rough sex stuff, right? Supposedly.
Right.
Okay, that's just not reality at all. It's crazy that has even, which, I mean, I feel like the police saw that, right? They're like, well, wait a second. So the nanny leaves the lunches at home and just happens to come back and walk into this. Marriage is until death do we part, right? I see where like there's all kinds of stuff said about when a spouse dies and their widower, immediately has a new relationship. And it can be really hard for family members of the person who died to understand it. But that isn't really that suspicious. And the other thing is, when you have a small child, especially for men, for whatever reason, a lot of times they end up hooking up with the caregiver of their child. It's a weird thing. I don't know. I guess it's like a bond that happens. But in this case, I could speculate on what happened and say that I think it's possible that Julianne has, because she said what she said, like, I went after he'd been shot once, and I don't know if she said something like, because he wasn't dead yet, Brendan told me to go get the other gun and shoot him again. When you're shooting someone in self-defense, you don't shoot them until they're dead. You shoot them until they're no longer a threat.
Right. And
so having had him shot in the head, right, by the first shot, it's highly likely they can actually prove that there's no way that she could have feared for her life in taking that second shot, right?
This is a really strange situation to have that second shot, but then to also have the person say to the police, he told me to go get the gun after he shot him, so I shot him again.
And so from a ballistics point of view, the first shot was done by the husband's service weapon, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And
I don't know that it's been like declared the first shot, but my understanding is the service weapon was discharged and it was discharged into Joseph Ryan.
Right. And so what has been written up, it says to the effect of, and this isn't a quote, but the initial shot didn't kill him. So Brendan Banfield told his daughter's caregiver to get another gun so they could shoot him again, and she did. Okay, when you're in self-defense, saying he wasn't dead yet is not justification for another shot.
Well, I mean, but you have the gun there. Why not just fire it again? What's the difference going to be in terms of... Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so. This is where it goes wonky. I think it's possible she used his gun, and I feel also that it's possible that Christine was dead before Joseph Ryan showed up, and in the meantime, Juliana, she could have orchestrated it all on her own. It seems unlikely that a au pair would... It's diabolical if she were to orchestrate it all on her own. It does, however, seem like the husband didn't want to be married anymore, and he may have helped her in orchestrating it all on her own. I've seen kind of rumors and innuendo and just sort of like, no facts really, that, they were in a relationship and that she may have thought it was more serious than he was taking it. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but
I've read it both ways actually in sort of the fallout from this. I've read that maybe he thought they were in a relationship and she was just having fun, and the opposite, that he was just having fun and she thought they were in a relationship.
Right. And so typically when you have a married man with a child, they are usually not the ones who are in the fantasy world. Because they're a grown-up, right?
Usually, but I think when you get a late 30s guy and a young 20s girl, and the guy is married with a kid, I think the fantasy is the early 20s girl.
Right, but an early 20s girl could at any point in time, if she felt like he was taking it too seriously, she would not be in this situation.
Yeah. I wish we'll go back to something you said. You said you think there's a possibility that when Joseph Ryan arrives to have his encounter, that Christine was already dead.
There's just about no question in my mind.
So
Not by
in that
very
scenario,
long, but
right. So in that scenario,
they're literally
either Brendan or Juliana or both has somehow orchestrated her death that morning, like as she's getting ready for her day.
right, because time of death has got to be, they didn't kill her
Close.
like days earlier, right? I don't think that this dude was in there stabbing her. And part of the problem was that Juliana's story to 911, it incorporated this whole, like, I saw him like standing above her. Christine was alive and he was, about to I can't remember exactly what all I read, but it was giving the impression that she had caught him in the act.
Right.
Didn't seem to me like what was happening, because he wasn't stabbing her. There's no question he wasn't stabbing her. Then if you have a situation where you've said, okay, this guy came over into, now granted, somebody set something up to have him end up at the house, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, like, best case scenario for these people that are going to be on trial here, for at least the one person that's going to be on trial, is somehow there is actual evidence that Christine Banfield and Joseph Ryan were actually talking. That's the best case scenario, because then maybe some of them get away with something here. It's going to depend on all this timing that we're talking about. It's 7:30 on Friday morning.
Right. It is a very lucky shot.
Well. So right now, obviously, we can't speculate too far into this case. How do you think this all shakes out?
Well, it's one of two things had to have happened. It is highly unlikely that Christine
And Joseph.
and Joseph had something going on at all. I mean, I guess it's possible, but that's very coincidental that it worked out so well for them.
Yeah.
That them being Juliana and Brendan. Okay, so in the event that, she didn't have anything going on with him, then you have a situation where either Juliana had already killed Christine, and she shot Joseph Ryan.
Right.
And for whatever reason, Brendan is covering up something, okay? Or you have the two of them kind of hosting this elaborate plot. Now, in that case, I just want to say, this is one of those things that I feel like normal people don't think about if you were going to do something like this. However, it's worth talking about, because the reason that there's something to talk about is because they never work. And it's actually called a staged domestic.
Yeah, that's what this would be. It would be, if you're totally right. It's crazy to me. I've seen a lot of stuff like this over the years, and it is the weirdest kind of domestic when it's one partner and the other partner is going to keep the kid, or when it's a relative stranger. And I'm saying that from the perspective that Juliana is not technically a family member. And I know that au pairs and nannies and live-in child caregivers can be very close to the family. But technically, in this situation, she's not going to be like a blood relative doing this if she did it. And if they did it together, it's largely going to fall on Brendan Banfield, I think. If they're together on this, I doubt that Juliana is the mastermind.
Okay, and so that seems right, because a husband clearly would have more motive to kill his wife than the nanny would.
Yeah.
Okay, so why is she arrested?
You think it's because she talked and he didn't.
I feel like there was evidence in the phone call made to 911 and then in her interviews with police. Somehow they have charged her, but not him.
Yeah.
Now, is the second shot enough? She said he told her to go get the gun and shoot him the second time. I mean, I get she's from Brazil, so English is probably not her first language.
We don't know that, though, but you're thinking maybe there could be some kind of like language translation barrier thing going on.
I think that when you say he told me to go get the gun because the guy wasn't dead yet, so I went and got the gun and shot him, I think you're literally like reading the dialogue of the stage scene, and that's not what you should be saying to the police or on the 911 call.
And there's the potential you're not a very good actor.
I mean, is that what you say? Like, he said, go get the gun that we bought at the gun show? Like, it's in the safe in the master bat. I mean, why do I know all this information, right? It's a weird thing to say it that way. So what would happen, what I imagine would happen in a organic scene of this is that Mr. Banfield shot him, but he was still coming at him. So I ran to the bathroom and grabbed the other gun and I shot him because I was still afraid that he was going to kill us. And you see how that, I mean, because you can imagine that happening, right? She says, you know, Mr. Banfield shot him and then he told me he wasn't dead yet and to go get the other gun that we bought at the gun show. It's like, oh, you just read the conversation. Is that a language thing? It could be. But it is kind of like you're saying you're reading the script. So I feel like Christine was probably killed shortly before. I assume they looked. Like, did the au pair actually, you know, head towards the zoo or wherever she was going? And all that had to have lined up. So she was killed beforehand.
It's sort of what it would have to be, yeah.
The guy shows up and, you know, if there's messages that say, hey, come on up or whatever, you know, that's being orchestrated, right? He probably goes in there and he's like, what the hell, right?
So the turnaround for the lunch thing is a complete ruse in order for her to get into the house and shoot him.
It's a complete ruse. Yeah, because the only reason the dude's coming over is to be the patsy. He's going to be the fall guy. She's just charged with second-degree murder.
Yeah, that's all she's charged with right now. It hasn't gone to the grand jury as of us talking, but it's on the it's on the docket.
And so that would be strictly on the story that we've been given, right? Because setting up an account on a sex fetish site and developing a relationship with somebody for any period of time to then have them come over to, you know, see you when you're not even you're acting like you're your boss. If it is,
that is all of the premeditation.
Oh, absolutely. That's like 1,000,000% premeditation. And it's going to be really hard to nail down who's sitting behind the device that's making those messages, right?
Oh, I think it's doable.
Possibly. It is possibly doable, but it's going to, and the messages alone, unless it happens to be like a very specific message, they can tie it somehow and convince a jury. The messages alone don't make them guilty of murder, right? Unfortunately,
if there is any kind of language barrier, then you have that issue because that will translate to text as well.
Yeah, you're right. And so as it stands right now, I think the only reason that Brendan Banfield hasn't also been arrested for murder is either he's not talking to police or there's evidence from the crime scene or from the two living involved people, which would be the au pair and the husband. You know, if he didn't have gunshot residue on his hands, if there's something that points to the fact that like she did both the shots. The other thing is there's going to be something that is off. The whole thing is really strange. For example, if there's a strange car outside of your house and your 4-year-old daughter and nanny are there, and you're actually concerned, don't you tell them to stay back?
Yeah, you don't take them inside.
Or tell them to go get a gun because the guy's not dead yet? It's
Yeah,
weird.
it's a little weird. So I don't have a lot more on this yet. I promise it's going to come back up at some point, at least as a news item. Probably several news items based on how this is going. I could not get this story out of my head for a very long period of time. And I couldn't think of like why. I sat down and I started thinking of the elements of the story. And I found some stories where people have tried to lure people with the different alternative sites, including the fetish sites and Ashley Madison and other things. But that really wasn't like none of those were what I was thinking of. And then I came across this one story. And so the element that I was apparently looking for that I did not realize I was looking for was the husband moving on with the nanny after a possibly staged homicide of the wife.
Right.
And that's, like those are elements that it takes me a while to like put together. And so I figured it out. I figured it out like as this probable cause hearing was going. I started like thinking back and I was like, whatever happened with that case? Because I finally remembered the case, but then I suddenly discovered I knew nothing about it and I wasn't sure of the exact names. So I went looking for it because I wasn't sure if it turned out to have been staged or not. But I remember thinking at some point that it was possibly staged. But the name I came up with was Mark Winger. Do you remember that case?
I had never, I don't know that I've ever heard of it before you made the correlation with this case.
Okay, so Mark Winger is this pretty smart guy, and he was in a marriage. He was like long married. He grew up in Ohio, I think, and I went to look up his wiki, and it looked like I jotted down that his birthday was in November of 1962. So he has all these things that go on in his life in his 30s. Here's my tick list for him. So he grew up right outside of Cleveland, Ohio. He was raised Jewish with a brother and a sister. They went to a local high school. He graduated. He went on and got a bachelor's degree in the 80s. And then he went into the United States Army as a second lieutenant. He did 2 years of service. And then he came out and he started working for a firm that manufactured precision laboratory instruments and assistive measurement devices. Whatever all of that means is what he did. So sometime in late 1987 or so, he goes on a blind date with a woman named Donna Brown. Donna Brown is working in a surgical ward as an operating room technician, and she happens to be a co-worker of Mark's older brother. So they get together, they date for 6 months. Mark proposes to her and they get engaged. 1989, they get married down in Hollywood, Florida, and they end up moving to Springfield, Illinois. And they find out over the course of the next couple of years that they can't have kids. In June of 1995, they're finally able to adopt a little girl, like an infant. And it was complete happenstance that this happened. Donna was working, and one of her coworkers had a patient that was a teenage girl that was about to go through the adoption process. And, I pulled some stuff from the wiki, but I do want to throw this out there. There's some stuff wrong with the wiki. Multiple things. One is some of the details are wrong. They talk about Mark Winger in a way that doesn't line up with the reality of the situation. I think that they're kind of making fun of Homer Simpson in there with some of the things they say about him with the whole Springfield thing. It's like a troll got in there and it never got fixed. But they mentioned that it was on 2020, and they say that it's 2026 season 44, episode 23, but I think that's wrong. I think it's actually a different season, maybe season 40, like 2 seasons earlier or season earlier. And it's actually season 43, episode 22. I think they're talking about the Dateline episode there. They just got it backwards. So they don't put a lot on here. This story is way more fascinating than the Wikipedia. If you get a chance, this is one of those that, like, if you can find the Dateline or the 2020 episode, totally worth watching. Don't you think?
I think so.
They have this little baby, and it's a whole new life for the two of them. Mark has to go to a business conference in August of 1995. So Donna talks to her family, and like she's a little scared to be alone with this, baby that she's adopted. And her mom is like, "Hey, why don't you guys come on down and see us?" So she goes to visit her family, and they have a great time. Because she's got the baby and all of the things like baby related with them, the family hires her a driver. So she is flying back to St. Louis International Airport, and she's going to meet this driver. The driver is going to take her from St. Louis to Springfield, Illinois. The person that they hire is named Roger Harrington. Now, on August 23rd, 1995, he picks her up and drives her home. But the Wingers complain later, either that week or early the next week, to Harrington's employer. And they say that he said some really weird things to Donna. And he was talking a lot about getting high and having orgies and doing all these strange things. Now, in the television documentaries you can watch and some of the audio that's available, the friends and family of Roger Harrington talk a lot about him. And he's actually a pretty interesting character. I feel like some of this complaint to his employer might have been either misconstrued or misunderstood, potentially. The people surrounding him don't have, like, this is one of the first times they're not talking about him lighting up a room when he walks into it, but they said that he was interesting and a lot of fun, and maybe there might have been something a little wrong with him. They talk about him talking to voices and stuff like that, but he has some, there's other people that come on and say he had some really reasonable explanations to all of that, and he actually seems kind of fun. Well, 6 days after this trip, after they've complained to Roger Harrington's employer, for some reason, Roger Harrington comes back to the Winger home. And on August 29th of 1995, Mark Winger calls 911, and he says that he has just shot a man to death, and that man was attacking his wife with a hammer. So the police come. Donna dies from the hammer attack. Roger Harrington dies from the gunshot wounds. Mark gives a statement. And the police put together a theory about all of this, backed by Mark and Donna's families, the Wingers families, and the Brown family, that Roger Harrington had come back and broken into the Wingers' home. He had attacked Donna over the complaint to his employer. And that's kind of where they closed the book on this for a long time. The cops in the audio and docuseries stuff will tell you otherwise, but the truth is that's where they closed the book on it. Paperwork-wise, they put a pen on it. And over time, they start to get an inkling that something is wrong with Mark Winger. The way they explain that is that he would call and ask about this closed domestic incident that involved like a stranger homicide and the death of one of the partners in the domestic relationship. He kept asking what was going on and what they were looking at. Under circumstances where you have an unsolved case, that is normal. Where it's not normal is when police present a theory and say, this is what happened, we're closing the books. We don't believe there's any further inquiry. You might inquire once or twice, but you probably shouldn't continue to inquire.
If you're the perpetrator and you're, because he wants to know, like, if they're on to him, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the police don't tell you they're on to you.
No, they do not.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify because to me that's so crazy.
Yeah. So in the aftermath of Donna's death at the hands of Roger Harrington, both of their families, and Donna had a couple of close friends, they all come together. And for the next several months through the holidays and into the new year in 1996, they help him out. But in 1996, he realizes in order for life to get back to normal, there's some things he has to do. And he hires a nanny. This is a woman named Rebecca. She gets hired in January after Donna has died in August. And it seems pretty normal at first. Donna's friends are still coming around, particularly her best friend, a woman named Deanne Schultz. And she finally has this epiphany. 4 or 5 years after the crime, she goes to the police and she says, I wanted to tell you guys something I did not tell you at the time that Donna died. She said, for several months ahead of Donna's death, Mark and I were having an affair. And when Donna died, Mark broke up with me. She confides in one of the detectives, basically saying, I think that Mark killed Donna. And that makes them open the case back up. So while they said they were suspicious of him, this statement where Donna goes to the police and she says, look, I think this man I had an affair with, who was my best friend's husband, killed my best friend, his wife. That's what made them re-examine everything.
Right. And in the meantime, while that had been happening, he had opened himself up to some scrutiny because he decided he was going to sue the transportation company. And so there was ongoing civil litigation.
Yeah, the civil litigation is like it falls on the transportation company that Harrington had come into his life. So he files a wrongful death suit. And while this 4 or 5 years is passing, he, in addition to the civil litigation, he gets married to the nanny and starts popping out new kids.
Why do you think the best friend / husband's girlfriend waited that long?
I don't know, and I haven't found a satisfying answer to that in all of this. Have you?
I don't know, but I will tell you. It obviously there's this case goes all the way around and there's a conclusion to it, but I find that very odd.
Well, the police think, if you read through their notes and their reports and you listen to them talk, the police think that it was possible that Deanne Schultz knew about a plan to harm Donna and maybe had been asked to participate in it and had declined.
Right, but when your best friend dies, that's all the more reason to immediately tell the police.
Unless you're involved.
Well,
and I looked at different statutes of limitations, like did she think she was an accessory or whatever. I can't find why she waited as long as she did.
Well, if you are involved, you take it to your grave.
That's what I would think.
And
it is a weird timeline.
Because she goes, I think it's about 5 years. I'm not sure, but it's like 4.
It's almost 5 years.
Okay, I was going to say it's like 4 or 5 years later. She goes to the police. Okay, something occurred that makes her go because I don't think she was involved, honestly, but I also wonder because what I think to myself is, is it possible that, yes, they were having an affair and that she was really disappointed that, he ends up marrying the nanny, right? And is it really an epiphany all those years later? Or did she make it up?
Yeah, so that's the other option. The other option is she started to see the light early, couldn't figure out a way to do it, and then passage of time allows her to make up this story that she's relatively certain there's no contradictory evidence to that will make them reopen the case and look at it. Because I've seen that happen with family members and friends before, where they do something that's not totally on the up and up with, in their mind, justice justifying the ends to the means, if that makes sense.
Right. And, I have a lot of trouble with this case. I always have a lot of trouble in cases that are, for all intents and purposes, closed as being resolved. And so in this case, husband of the victim killed the perpetrator in defense of her, right? That's how this...
That's the story that was told for 5 years.
Correct. And so when that is being the end of the case, and all of a sudden it's not the end of the case, and the reason it's not the end of the case is because somebody comes forward 5 years later.
Yeah, and they just make up an affair story.
I don't know. It just really bothers me.
Now, the cops must be editing the wiki pages because they say one thing and the reality is a different thing. But this is what I'll say. The civil case is having a lot of discovery happen and having happened right before the time where Deanne Schultz comes forward to the police. And there is evidence collected that the cops don't realize they have, but the attorneys involved in around the civil case end up giving back to the police. Among that evidence are these strange Polaroid photos that, for some reason, the first cop at the scene, he had a Polaroid camera in his car, and he snapped off 3 quick photos of the, quote, crime scene. And what he has in those photos contradicts all the stories that Mark had told over the years to other people, but particularly the first 911 call in the story to the cops and the paramedic is contradicted by the photos. Just these 3 Polaroids. That's really it. They also kept, because of whatever their local regulations are, they kept a couple of boxes of evidence, including photographs and items from Roger Harrington's car. So there's a bank slip, like a deposit slip in Roger Harrington's car that has the date and time, basically, that he was killed with the Winger's address. And it says Mark Winger at the top.
That's really hard to put aside, right?
Yeah, so basically...
But it was there all along, right?
Correct. It was there. The cops just didn't know what it meant.
I mean, to me, it's because, this is in the 90s and people actually had to write stuff down, right? And so to me, it meant I'm meeting, Mark Winger at this address at 4:30.
Right.
And so none of that changes from the time it happens to the time he's charged.
Right. But this theory starts to develop after Deanne Schultz talks, that the cops start to look at, did Donna having this problem with this driver who was talking about getting high and having orgies and all this stuff, did that ride set in motion events that Mark had been thinking of how to do this? And Mark's a smart guy. He's had decent jobs. He's been, in an officer's position in the Navy. He's well educated. He's a smart dude. So when this part happens, the cops decide to take a run at it, and they put it together for a prosecutor. And they present the theory that Mark had decided he was going to kill her and shoot Roger Harrington using this fabricated story that Roger Harrington had attacked her, who's this relative stranger to them. And the prosecutor takes that theory forward, and they charge him. And they use evidence at trial that include conversations that for some reason are recorded between Winger and Harrington arranging a meeting on the day of the murders. I have no idea why that existed, but it did. And they found testimony from paramedics. from the original. Go
Are
ahead.
you sure that it wasn't the roommate?
What do you mean?
I thought Mark Winger had called and briefly spoke to the roommate to get him on the phone, and she testified. I don't know that there was a recording, but maybe.
I mean, according to Bonnie's blog of crime and the Jacksonville.com website,
Okay.
there are some kind of recording that indicates it was Winger and Harrington talking, but it could be that it's one of the roommates, because I heard that in one of the docuseries we were listening to, that it was testimony more like that. But there's also testimony from the paramedics that Winger's statements indicated a much different positioning of the bodies, and then he doubled down on it, saying he hadn't moved them, he had just held her.
Right, but that again happened at the time, right? Before
this
the
all
case
happened.
was closed as it was the first time.
Right, but this is stuff that came to trial after he's charged.
No, I understand. It's just, when evidence exists, it shouldn't turn on anything, in my opinion.
Well, you could say the first investigation was kind of quick. They closed it out. And then her coming forward was the piece that tied together old thoughts that became a new theory that made more sense, maybe.
Well, I mean, maybe, but I know you don't want to jump ahead. I just want to say, I agree with the process of a jury making a decision. And it's really hard to say like they made the wrong decision. So I'm not saying that, right? It's a jury decided that he did in fact do all that stuff, right? Yeah. And that's fine. That's the decision they made. And I wouldn't even say that I don't think this guy necessarily is innocent, but he has been found guilty by a jury. I don't make it my prerogative to go undo juries. Sometimes it's warranted and sometimes it's not. There are a lot of holes in this prosecution.
Yeah, there really are. And so Deanne Schultz testifies, and she testifies not just about the affair, but that Winger, that Mark had tried to involve her in what he was doing, and that it would be better if Donna died. And that confused me, to be honest, because why would you, like you said, why would you not shout that from the rooftops day two? Like right after it happened?
Especially if there was, now she was given immunity to testify. Okay. Now I didn't feel like she needed immunity to testify.
But they clearly did.
It didn't see, well, I mean, to me that sounds like pressure. Yeah. Like, we're going to give you immunity to testify, so you're not going to be charged. But based on what she said, I don't see what on earth they would have charged her with. The issue, I mean, I guess maybe obstruction. I don't know. I doubt it, because she, as a citizen, unless they directly ask her, which I don't think they did because there wasn't much of an investigation. So, how, if there's not an investigation, how can someone obstruct it, right? Yeah. They really can't. And so unless somebody directly asked her something that she answered in a manner that was inconsistent with the truth, I don't see how she could have been charged with anything. And that made me wonder, because it doesn't make any sense when people are given immunity when there's nothing they testify to that would allow them to be charged with a crime. It also doesn't make any sense when your best friend has died and in 5 years you're going to suddenly remember that he said that he was going to things would be better if she were just dead, and allude to things that make you in 5 years go to the police and talk about it. Seems like you could just as easily go ahead and say it now.
Yeah.
In fact, you should say it now, because you want to be clear that you're not part of this. Now, they had a relationship going on for a certain amount of time, and she was willing to let it slide. And then when the relationship was over, she was no longer able to let it slide. That still doesn't sound legit, does it?
No, it doesn't. That's the thing. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So he's charged in 2001. He's convicted by a jury in 2002. And I'm with you on this. I have so many questions about this case, but he does do something that really, really, really confused me. I found this in an old document. Now, it gets used as a source a couple of places online, including Reddit, WebSleuth, and Wikipedia. But it's from a couple of news articles. I don't know what to say about people when they get themselves into situations. This one, I'm just giving you the news article part of it to see if it changes it for you. It sort of made me go, all right, you know what? There's just too much going on here for me to understand what's happening. So the first news article comes from a guy named Chris Detro. He's writing for the Springfield, Illinois State Journal Register. And it is from May 21st, 2007. It was published as Documents Detail Murder for Hire Plot. And I haven't mentioned that here yet because this is sort of what made me go, I can't help this situation. But it says Mark Winger's alleged plot to have a key witness in his Sangamon County murder case and a former childhood friend killed by, quote, hitmen is as outrageous as the double murder scheme for which he was sentenced to life in prison in 2002. State police investigative summaries, transcripts of interviews, and handwritten letters purportedly from Mark Winger to another Pontiac Correctional Center inmate were filed in February of 2007 in Sangamon County in support of a state motion to dismiss Winger's petition for post-conviction relief in his 2002 case. Now, I just said a lot of weird stuff there. Did it make sense?
Yes.
The filings document an investigation that resulted in Mark Winger being charged in Livingston County with 2 counts of solicitation for murder. So those charges appear to have originated in the court in February of 2006. So it's about a year and 2 or 3 months before this article. On Monday, a judge denied Winger's motions to have several pieces of evidence barred from trial, which was scheduled to start June 11th. Winger's alleged plan included hiring out killings of the former Deanne Schultz, who testified against Mark Winger in his murder trial, and longtime friend Jeffrey Gelman, who is a wealthy real estate developer living in Florida, as well as Gelman's wife and 2 children, and if enough money is left over, to kill his ex-wife's stepfather, Ira Drescher of Florida, who Winger said still sends him taunting letters in prison. Winger even scripted an alternative ending, if possible, to frame ex-Springfield, Illinois police detective Jim Graham for Deanne Schultz's murder. According to investigators, Winger's plan was to have, quote, hitmen kidnap Gelman, who apparently offended Winger when he would not post Mark Winger's $1 million bail in the Sangamon County case. The kidnappers were to obtain a large ransom and then kill Gelman. The ransom money was to be used to pay the killer for the deaths of Gelman and Schultz. Winger, who was 44 in 2007, is serving a life sentence without parole for the 95 murders of his wife, Donna, 31, and airport shuttle service driver Roger Harrington, who was 27, inside the Winger's West Side Springfield home. Police initially believed that Harrington, who had a history of mental problems and had given Donna Winger a harrowing ride home from the St. Louis airport several days before her death, came to the house and beat her to death with a hammer. Mark Winger told police he ran up from the basement, grabbed the gun, and shot Harrington. But police later developed evidence that Harrington was set up as part of Winger's plan to murder his wife. 3 years later, Deanne Schultz, one of Donna's best friends, told authorities she had been having an affair with Mark at the time of the murders. She said Mark had made what she thought might be incriminating comments to her. These new allegations against Winger come to light when another Pontiac inmate named Terry Hubble writes a private investigator named Ron Smith, who was a former state police officer, sometime prior to April 13, 2005, and said that he had knowledge of a murder for hire plot. Hubble said other inmates found him easy to talk to and sometimes come up to him with these crazy ideas. He said most of them are just blowing smoke, but from time to time, one comes along that is for real. Hubble, 44, is serving a life term for the 1983 murder of 14-year-old Angel Greenwood in Olney, Illinois. Hubble beat the girl after she refused to perform a sex act, and then he ran her over with his truck. So Ron Smith contacted the FBI, and on May 18th of 2005, the FBI contacted the Illinois State Police for help investigating this alleged plot, which took shape over the first half of 2005. Subsequent interviews with Hubble and several pages of handwritten notes allegedly sent to Hubble by Mark Winger describe a detailed scenario. Mark allegedly approached Hubble in the prison yard, asked him to arrange for one or more people to carry out a plot meticulously scripted by Winger down to the last words he wanted Schultz to hear. Schultz, having remarried at the time, was under a different last name. According to the documents, the hitmen were to kidnap Gelman, force him to pay $1 million to ensure that Gelman's wife and children wouldn't be harmed. After the money was received, the men were to kill all three of them, including Gelman, and then to kill Deanne. Winger then told Hubble to tell the hitmen they were free to come up with any plan they wanted with the ransom money. He allegedly told Hubble that when he got out of prison, he would work for the hitmen. The state police report says that Mark told Hubble that when he graduated from school, he wanted to be a Central Intelligence Agency hitman or work for the FBI, not because he was into the law, but because he wanted to do some cold-hearted stuff. He also said that he knew he could pull a trigger. By the way, this all sounds like complete nonsense made up by Hubble to me.
It sounds to me like they were like drinking some jailhouse hooch.
Yep.
And like shooting the breeze and like dreaming. Like he says that he wanted to be a CIA hitman for the FBI. Does that even make any sense?
Or work for the FBI.
Oh, or work for the FBI. I see.
He has a delusional thinking of what
It sounds
any of
to
those
me
people
like
do.
they're just like, and so again, been found guilty by a jury, not arguing that point, just saying none of the evidence ever changed except for the ex-girlfriend of the husband and best friend of one of the victims coming forward with a almost woman scorned statement. I'm just saying, okay? This is absolutely something that an innocent person could be mad about and be shooting the breeze with another person sentenced to life in prison about wishing and dreaming, right?
Well, they do a lot of writing down. The state police come in and they put a bunch of recorders on everybody. Like they get him to keep talking about all of this, and they essentially sell it as the real deal, and he gets a sentence for it.
Right. And, that was a great use of resources, right?
Yes, it's good to give the guy that's getting life in prison more time in prison for crimes that he
Dreaming
is
about.
fantasizing about. Yeah, pretty much.
And, to the extent, he shouldn't have done that. I don't feel like he's had any more problems. I will tell you the most convincing thing to me is that his nanny turned wife turned mother of, I think they had 3 kids, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so she became the mother of their adopted child.
Who's the oldest?
Who was the oldest. Now, she was the nanny, right? And she stepped in as the nanny and realized the child needed...
Mom.
She needed, I don't think that it was ever her intention going in. I think she was just the caregiver. But she believes that I think it's her former husband at this point, and the father of her children killed his wife, his first wife. She believes it. And when she talks about it, you can tell she believes it. She has changed her name back, I guess, to her maiden name.
Correct.
And a couple of things come up there for me, but
she didn't know him at the time of the murder.
She did not know him at the time of the murders. You're right. She did not meet him until the January following the murders.
Correct.
And she met him. She was significantly younger than him, and she was the babysitter, essentially, right?
Yeah.
She had nothing to do with anything to do with the murder, right? Which is different than the other case in the news, right?
Yep.
When she sits on camera and talks about it, and her position is that, she's not standing by this man. I don't know that she says anything really to condemn him, but I did notice that their children call him Mark as opposed to Dad. And I feel like he alludes to the fact that they do not communicate with him when he is speaking, and that being Mark speaking. He's saying something to the effect of, it doesn't matter if I never talk to them again. I will always love them. They'll always be my children. It doesn't seem that they reciprocate that. So his family, at least believes in the process, and they believe the jury found him guilty for good reason, right? And to me, that's something. The other part of that, though, is it really bothers me that all of this turned on a woman's statement made at this weird timing, because it wasn't immediate, and it wasn't like on her deathbed or what. I don't know what the extremes there are, but it seems like you've either got to speak up or you're gonna hold it to your grave, unless you're doing something vengefully, right?
Yeah.
Now, maybe she really did know, and just, she thought more of her relationship with him than she did her friendship with her best friend. I mean, oh, that's so awful to say. But, maybe it really was the case. Maybe she couldn't bring herself to believe it until some other things lined up. I just think it's strange timing, and it really bothers me that the case turned on that. But I do believe in the process to some extent. And, the jury seeing all the evidence presented before them, I hope they made the right call. And his wife, this is really bad to say, but his wife going from nanny to wife to mother of his children is almost the same as like police telling you something and you believing it. And it's like the same personality does that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what to say about this one. So this would be my take on it. This is definitely a case that a couple of conviction integrity people could spend a few minutes on. I'm almost convinced that it's solved, but I'm really not. Like, I keep telling myself that that's probably the right way to go with things.
I mean, the evidence is always going to show the outcome, right?
It doesn't show any outcome.
Well, I mean, but the evidence didn't change. There was no smoking gun that went from, he killed the guy in self-defense to,
yeah. I see what you're saying.
The evidence didn't change. The only thing that changed was the best friend of the victim coming forward, like at a strange time, because it was four-ish years later or whatever, and saying, hey, by the way. And to me, maybe it's true. Maybe she's telling the truth. Maybe she was guilt-ridden. But, like, why wasn't she guilt-ridden when it happened, or after he broke up with her, or whatever, right? Yeah. Why was it at the specific time that she did it? To me, it's suspect. And with no other evidence. Now, I do realize the Polaroids are there. And I realize that there's some, scientific opinion that what he's saying couldn't have happened based on what the Polaroids show. But you also hear the guy moaning in the background. And to me, that means that that's somebody that could still be moving, right? I'm just saying that because it was his positioning and some other things. And, maybe that is something that with more elaboration could indicate definite guilt. Again, the first officer on the scene took those pictures, so it existed at the time that they said, oh yeah, he killed him in self-defense. Again, the evidence shifting on that one thing. What if it really was the case that she was just really ticked off for whatever reason?
I've been through all the court records for this because I have a lot of the same thoughts that you had. And my opinion is there's two things you could attack. One is Deanne Schultz came forward in 99 or 2000, whatever it was. She came forward because she had been talking, this is according to her in her testimony, because she had been talking to her psychiatrist. She'd been having trouble sleeping. She felt guilty. And her psychiatrist recommended that if these things were affecting her in this way, I don't have the psychiatrist statement. I just have hers. She says the psychiatrist said she should go and she should talk to the police. So she did. That's her part of it. But the other part of it that could be important is, and in my opinion, is actually way more damning than Deanne. It's the testimony of a guy named Tom Bevel. Now, Tom Bevel ran a consulting company who specialized in bloodstain pattern analysis and crime scene reconstruction. He had some really specific testimony that sort of tied into what you just said. He said, in his opinion, the bloodstain evidence from the crime scene showed that Winger actually shot Harrington in the top of the head after he hit him with a hammer in the chest. And then he beat Donna to death with a hammer and then waited. And after a few minutes had passed, which the way this times out would be while he's calling 911, he realizes Harrington is not dead. He rolls Harrington over and he shoots him in the forehead. That's what gets him convicted of the 2 first-degree murders and gets him sentenced to life in prison.
It's really interesting because it's my opinion, with absolutely nothing to back it up at all, except logic, that he would have killed Donna before Roger arrived.
Yeah, we kind of talked about in the other case. That seems like it's going to be a lot. Yeah.
What?
Just suddenly you're going to commit 2 murders? Why not? I agree with you. I think why not do
I feel like
this murder?
There's the reason it's if he's been found guilty of this. So, as far as I'm concerned, he did it according to the jury's finding. And so, he said be here at 4:30. I imagine it was a ruse, something to the effect of, I know there's been some trouble and we just want to apologize. So come over so we can talk or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what he would have said to get him over there, because I certainly wouldn't have, in his position, gone to someone's house who had made complaints about me. That doesn't sound like a good idea, right?
This is certainly a messy, messy case.
Right. It also seems like he would have said he's going to come meet the wife if he was actually setting him up for murder, right? Now, granted,
Yeah.
Mark, to my knowledge, he denies having called him to come over. It's not
he did, but there's no official record of him denying it.
Okay.
But there is a record of people saying we heard.
Well, the story was that he was on the treadmill and he heard a ruckus upstairs, went upstairs and found this dude.
Right.
So, he didn't say, hey, yeah, I called him to come over and, we were going to talk about it. That's an implication that comes from the paper and the car. Again, that evidence doesn't change in the time between him not being charged and then him ultimately being charged. Was it a poor investigation to begin with? Yeah, probably. I would say actually, yes, it was a poor investigation, because why would he have had that written that way? Unless they may have a perfectly reasonable explanation for why that didn't send up any flags. I don't know. But would you agree he probably killed her before he arrived?
I think it makes the most sense.
Okay, and so that being said, if he killed her before he arrived, and the scientific expert testifies about the blood spatter, and he indicates that he shot Roger in the top of the head and then was beating Donna to death. And so if he gets that fact, without question, wrong, right? Because he's saying he's killing her in the meantime while he's
Right.
calling 911. Does that undermine the credibility of the rest of his testimony?
I don't know.
If he's got the
It
timing, because to me, what he said really didn't make a whole lot of sense. If you're setting somebody up for murder, you're not going to be murdering them while the person is there. It's going to have happened, and you're waiting for your fall guy to show up.
Yeah, I noticed they nitpick in some of these, like some of the different available media on this case about when he shot him, and like he I think he used the word bullet, and he actually shot him twice, but he said it singularly. So, like, what does that mean? I think this case needs a reexamination. I don't want to I don't come out of this feeling I'm so hard on that he didn't do it.
Okay, well, you can tell, if they should have been able to tell who beat her to death with a hammer.
So that's what I was going to say.
I mean, what's on their arms, right? If he was beating her to death with the hammer when he was shot, he didn't have a chance to wash up, right?
Well, I'm just saying, yes, you're right, because he's calling 911 at a time that some of this guy's testimony doesn't make sense. But my point was going to be a lot of the blood spatter analysis that would have been testified to at the time, and I don't care about any of you that hear this and think I'm wrong. It was just wrong. It was bad. It was bad science. It was misunderstood science. Unfortunately, Tom Bevel falls into that pool.
Well, I mean Roger. Because the narrative until he was charged.
Roger's dead.
I understand that, but the narrative until Mark is charged was that Roger was beating Donna to death with a hammer, and Mark saw this happening and he killed him to defend his wife. So even though Roger is now dead, it should have been readily apparent as to if he was beating her with the hammer or not.
Well, there was autopsy evidence presented on Roger Harrington. And I'll say this, the autopsy evidence was lacking. They indicated that but it's very prosecution skewed. The interpretation was that Roger died due to the two gunshots. One is the top left side of his head, and the other one is one is to the top left side of his head, and the other one's to the left side of his eyebrow. But they did say that his chest had contusions they assumed were caused by hammer strikes. I can still get past that, the hammer strikes. But my thing is, who hit him with the hammer?
Well, I would say that it would be in the struggle and him. But see, he's got to be the perpetrator in that case. So he's got the hammer in his hand and he's hitting Donna with it. And she is defending herself in a way that causes it to blow back on his chest. That makes him the perpetrator. Okay. Now, the other thing would be if Mark is the perpetrator and when he hears him moaning or whatever, he hits him, but then realizes that's not a great idea and shoots him again. Now, it would be apparent as far as we don't have any information as to whether or not if he was hit in the chest with the hammer, was Donna's blood on his chest?
Yeah, no, we don't have any of that. And that's because we have two problems here. First problem is there's a very limited investigation to begin with, but there was evidence. So that means it's kind of cherry picked. That's the first problem. The second problem is that we're not really putting that evidence into motion for 4 years, 5 years, actually. It's 5 years after, by the time it's actually in a courtroom in front of a judge and a jury.
Right. And they have no way to determine any of that stuff at that point.
No. And so best case scenario, I think this is a case that this is kind of what conviction integrity units are designed to do. If they kept evidence of this case, thinking that potentially there could be appeals. But I think the idea was, you know what, that guy tried to hire those other people. We're just going to shut down everything about him because he was trying to hire these people to kill his friends. But that actually might be a bridge too far for me. And not from the perspective that you think. I'm not looking at that going, okay, well, if Mark Winger was going to kill these two people, meaning Leanne and Gilman, then he had to have killed his wife. It's not like that for me. It's more like, I can't believe that this guy is so unlucky that he meets Roger Harrington, who kills his wife, who he shoots and goes to prison for both murders, to also meet Terry Hubble, who is now also setting him up for this other. Like, that becomes like the story of Job.
Right, but I think Mark probably did say that he would pay $1 million to have those people killed. I'm saying that there was never any reality to it.
Oh, I agree with that. That's
And
like,
so,
I could totally believe that.
while
It's
he-
the prison hooch idea is
yeah,
perfect.
that's what I'm saying. Like, so they are drinking their prison hooch, and they're taught. I mean, because he doesn't have $1 million, right?
Correct.
And then they're literally coming up with the craziest thing they can think of. But he would hold animosity towards the chick, right? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember her name. That came forward, right?
He would definitely. Okay, you mean he's holding animosity towards Deanne Schultz?
Yes. And so would he hold animosity either way, or would he hold animosity and want her? Because she's already on the record, and that doesn't change in an appeal, right?
Right.
So she's already testified. What good would actually having her killed do?
You make a really good point, and it is really absurd.
It's just something for him to shoot the breeze with, because he has literally nothing better to do. And then, like, his best friend that wouldn't bond him out or whatever, like, yeah, he's probably mad, but I'm not sure he understood how that worked anyway, because, like, he would still be in jail even if he had been bailed out pre-trial, right? I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like, it doesn't make, like, so even what is being said doesn't make a lot of sense, except if there's people that are in jail for life that are bored talking. And so, you said he couldn't possibly be unlucky enough to come across both of those things. Well, I agree. I think that he 100% settled that stuff, or at least talked about it to some extent that gave him enough to go and testify about it. I don't think that there was any credibility behind it at all.
No, it's almost got this like Austin Powers villain feel. It made me want to go look up Terry Hubble and see how many cases Terry Hubble has testified as a jailhouse informant, and what did he get for those? Because I know he's not getting out of jail.
Right, and they're very specific when they talk about what he does and doesn't get.
Right.
And, anytime it says because you can say he got absolutely nothing for that testimony. Okay. But then you can also say he didn't get a reduction in sentence. He didn't get out of jail. And when you say stuff like that, you're like, okay, so what did he get? Because you're
TV in his cell.
whatever,
What
right? Whatever it is. I don't even know what the bargaining chips are at that point. But when you've got somebody with a life sentence, of course you're not going to let them out of jail because they give you a tiny tip, right? Of course not.
Yeah.
But like, what did you give him? Because they didn't say we gave him absolutely nothing. They said very specifically what they didn't give him. And to me, it sounded suspect. Now, but if you're not like me and analyzing every tiny word, you're thinking, oh, well, he didn't get anything for that. But that's not what they said.
Yeah.
And
well,
it's all of that is ridiculous anyway. It does, however, make him look more guilty. I agree with that. But at the same time, it just doesn't seem very plausible to me. And I can see why investigators would want to double down on this guy because let's face this, if Roger didn't do it, right, which is, he didn't do it according to the findings of the trial, it is really bad that investigators even considered that he did, right?
yeah.
If he's truly an innocent victim, which is what he would have to be, because I don't feel like there's any in between here.
No, there's no in between. I mean, I even like, I went down these weird paths. Like, maybe the whole idea was Mark on his hiring spree was going to originally hire just Roger to do something to her. But that doesn't make any sense, because then there wouldn't be this whole back and forth with the employer, and there certainly wouldn't be the wrongful death lawsuit later.
I feel like that was a little bit interesting.
The wrongful death lawsuit is almost the move of an innocent man.
Well, and right, or somebody who is destined to be caught because they're too smart for their own good. You know what I mean, though? Like,
yes,
because he either was oblivious or had it coming.
I think the truth is he might be a smart idiot.
Well, I think that's pretty obvious. How was it? Now, Deanne says, like, oh, he capitalized on this, like, this situation that unfolded with the driver having sort of erratic behavior, right? But there are independent accounts of Donna telling her family, her mom, her sisters, about this experience. And so, like, Roger acted a certain way, right? That left a bad taste in her mouth. And it's unfortunate, if he is truly an innocent bystander who was victimized here, it's unfortunate that he chose to behave that way that day, right? Not to victim shame or anything. But, there's a lot of situations where people can sit back and they can say, I absolutely did not talk about voices in my head, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what's being said there. It was explained away otherwise. And I'm going, that's a weird twist, right? It's weird. It's weird that she could have had this weird guy. Now, but it's also weird that if it was so bad, well, again, that's not actually part of the narrative because he doesn't say that he invited him over to the house. But I don't feel like there's any question that Roger wasn't in a position that he was going to be going over to some former client's house making demands. This is like... what, Uber before Uber was a thing? It was like airport transportation. So basically what he did was drive people back and forth from the airport, and it was a couple of hours, right?
Right.
And so he worked for a company that did that. Well, he was not in a position. Now, he felt comfortable enough in the situation for whatever that actually happened to happen. But at the same time, not comfortable. I mean, I just don't see this kid going and being like, you made a complaint on me, and they didn't say that he was fired, did they?
I didn't pay attention to that part when I was reading through the testimony the first time.
I don't think there was anything. I'm not even sure that there was an official complaint. I think
it was more like he called the boss and said, look what your dude did.
Right, but her parents indicate that they paid for the driver.
Yeah.
So it seems kind of weird that her husband would have called. And so that would actually add to him, creating this elaborate ruse, right? It would seem like him calling, because maybe I'm wrong, but typically if it's whoever pays for something would be the one to address a customer service type issue, right?
Yeah.
So it would have been whoever paid for the driver. And that would have been her family, not her husband, but like her mom and dad or whoever did it. I don't know. I wonder. This would be one of the most heartbreaking cases if he were to be truly innocent. Because it's gone all the way through the system, and I don't. Does he have an appeal left? Did you say? Or
no. I mean, this isn't a case that appellate attorneys are gonna really touch. Like there's still some stuff out there. I read all the way through appeals related to the solicitation for murder case, and I stopped reading around 2010 for purposes of what we're talking about because it just started repeating. Ultimately, I think your assessment of that case is correct, and I think he should get, like, this is a case that is strange enough for me personally, looking at it. And I read through the testimony, and something I noticed, I forgot to bring up earlier, something I did notice is these prosecutors were brilliant at semantics.
Man, that can be really tough if you've got a group.
That can be a double-edged sword.
If you've got a group that doesn't pick up on semantics, then, I mean, you could be having two different conversations. Like you could be
Correct.
saying one thing and they could be understanding something completely different.
Well, I just wanted to point that part out, but generally speaking, I didn't get enough of a feel that he definitely did it. I just saw, okay, his original habeas, and this is back in like 2005 or 6. So that's, for people who don't know, that's generally when you're making your move to federal court. It can happen at different times, but typically it's because all your other appeal resources or options are exhausted or final, and you're moving to the federal courts with this case. So that's what he was doing, and there was an ineffective assistance of counsel and some other things going on. It got denied and ignored for the most part. It was just like a standard denial across the board. They didn't really combat anything he said or come up with any new brilliant things. But when I looked at it, I did think, this is the kind of case they should go back and take a hard look at what Tom Bevel was saying. I'm not saying anything negative about Tom Bevel. I'm saying any cases that largely hinge on, and that kind of testimony it's very prejudicial. It puts the guy at the crime scene doing these things that fit the evidence. But unfortunately, because it has blood spatter mixed in with this crime scene reconstruction, and we now know that a lot of that's just like, art, basically. People are giving you this impression. It's not that it's always wrong. There is a little bit of science to it, but there's not the certainty that was testified to. And I happen to know that, like, the Bevel Green is, well, I guess back then he still would have been TBI, but his company, his forensics company, I happen to know that, like, they played prosecution stuff pretty loose.
Right. And it's just like almost like never say never, right? You could have very strong indications. Everything I've ever seen indicates that more than likely this did or didn't happen or whatever. But that wasn't my understanding of what was said. What my understanding of what was said was that, like, based on these pictures that were snapped with a Polaroid camera, by the first officer on the scene before anything had been touched, that there was absolutely no way that the 911 call made sense based on the positions of the body as you see them here, the bodies as you see them here. And so while it could be very indicative that it wasn't an accurate assessment, I don't think you should ever say there's no way that it's possible. There's always a way that something's possible.
You have no idea what the first officer in the scene was doing. Like, how long did he bring the Polaroid in with him? Did he walk back with it? I didn't see a lot of that in here, and I could have missed it in the testimony, but I didn't see it in relation to what's in the Polaroids, which is
pretty sure they could have gotten that thrown out for lack of foundation. But that's not, I mean, that would be kind of petty because there are 2 dead bodies in the photos, right?
No. Yeah. I wouldn't be trying to, like, that's not my point. My point is, you don't know who touched who checked who for signs of life, who thought somebody might need rolled to their side. You don't know what happened when you've got first responders who are about to scoop these bodies up and take them away. You have no idea what point he took those photos because they're all right in the mix together.
Right.
And I've seen the photos.
And it seems like whenever there's testimony given, you're always trying to impeach testimony or undermine the credibility of the narrative that's been accepted. And, the paramedic said that he had stated something contrary to what the photographs showed. But and I realize that, and I look at it and I see, and I'm like, okay, I understand that it's contrary to what he said, but how does that change the case? Like, how does it make him the killer over
the story that he told?
The story that's
with his Roger Harrington. It doesn't. And that's the other thing is we have all these interpretations of how people are supposed to react in emergencies and with grief and with all these things. But the truth is 99% of human beings just act hysterical. Even if they don't outwardly show hysteria, they melt down on the inside and their actions make no sense. And for a second or two, they forget everything. And sometimes people can have shock set in that moment that nothing they say makes sense about what happened. So them discounting, Mark Winger's statements here, and I'm not defending this guy either. If he is the killer, that would be what? Uxorcide? So if he's the Uxorcidist here, killing of one's wife, then he needs to be in exactly where he is. But if you just look at it all for just a second, you can kind of see how you could really wish this case either way. And that evidence is like the best genie in bottle. Because you could clearly, at least for 5 years, say that this was Roger Harrington killing her and self-defense or justifiable homicide in the defense of others when he killed him, killing an intruder. So Mark Winger could have been justified. You could go that way, or you could go the way that it landed. But when you go both ways, like, that's kind of weird for me. And like the way that they put it all together here, I feel like they just haven't had a good appeal. And like, here's what's interesting about his case. It's never going to be touched by an Innocence Project because there's really no DNA involved unless we were to convince them that like they should look at if Donna's DNA is on like Roger. But then the bodies are gone. We're dealing with all this time passage, even not just the passage of time between, the then and now, but the passage of time between the incident itself and the trial because they waited so long to charge him. So I don't think an Innocence Project is going to get on board without being kind of talked into that. And I think that an argument could be made that a percentage of the public doesn't want someone like Mark Winger to have the Innocence Project or some type of innocence backing in a situation like this. Where I do think it would be important, and last time I'll say this in this episode, is I think it would be important for a conviction integrity unit to look at all of this. Because if something else has happened in here and you can track any one of these groups of people, like if you found out that Terry Hubble has somehow testified in 19 conspiracy to solicit murder trials, maybe we throw that whole thing out. If you find out that the prosecutor always puts on this one witness who happens to have been related to jurors in the last 7 cases, maybe we throw this out. Because that's a thing that came up in the habeas. They were like, these 2 people are biological relatives of a state's witness or something. But I think an integrity unit looking at this couldn't hurt. I do think that, like, there's an element of me that believes he probably did it, and then there's an element of me that wonders, and neither one of them win. If that makes sense.
It does.
All right, you got anything else on Mr. Winger or any of this other stuff?
Nope.
Thank you so much for listening today. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
All right, so I'm going to tell you guys a few things about some of the folks who are helping sponsor our show. Now, Labrati Creations sponsors our show, and you can always use the Crime XS code there. You can also just message them at Labrati Creations, and they will generally do something for the people who come from True Crime XS. They were our very first sponsor. They've done a lot for the show, and that code is CrimeXS at LabratiCreations.com. The first new advertisers that we have, and I've selected all of these guys. I've selected all of these advertisers. So the very first one is Cure. Now, I'm going to tell you guys about this, about Cure as being one of our sponsors. If you're an athlete, you know that proper hydration is key to peak performance, but plain water can be boring and sports drinks can be filled with artificial ingredients and added sugars. That's why we love Cure. It's a clean and effective way to stay hydrated and perform at your best. I use it late in the day when I switch out of caffeine mode. Specifically, when I hit the pool or I go play tennis with my wife, I use Cure to help me stay hydrated. It helps me recover after a long day. Now, you guys may not know this, but I build things. And right now, I've been building several structures on our property out here. Among those is a new podcast studio space for myself. I do a lot of that work at night and into the wee hours. And I always have some Cure with me to go into my aluminum water bottle. Hydration is not just about filling up my aluminum bottle with water. Cure Hydration is an oral rehydration solution that contains the perfect balance of electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb water and rehydrate quickly. Whether I'm building things or putting the podcast together or chasing these dogs that you sometimes hear in my studio up and down the trails to get them worn out, Cure Hydration is the way that I choose to go. Cure Hydration is an oral rehydration solution, or an ORS, that contains the perfect balance of electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb water and to rehydrate quickly. The formula is made with all natural ingredients like coconut water powder and pink Himalayan salt. It's free from artificial flavors, from sweeteners, and preservatives. Cure Hydration is vegan, gluten-free, and non-GMO, making it a great option for anyone with dietary restrictions or preferences. The packets are convenient and easy to use. You just mix them with your water and you drink. They're perfect for on the go. They're perfect for travel. And anytime you need a quick and effective hydration boost, ready to combat dehydration, then you try Cure today and feel the difference for yourself. You can use code TrueCrimeXS for 20% off your order. That's TrueCrimeXS. I have a link that I'm putting in the most recent episode show notes, and TrueCrimeXS will get you 20% off. Our second sponsor for the show today is Laird. Now, Laird has a list of things that they want me to tell you about. They have better ingredients with amazing taste and functional benefits. They have a superfood creamer crafted from the highest quality, all-natural, real food ingredients. All Laird products are sustainably sourced and thoroughly tested to ensure that you're incorporating the cleanest, finest fuel into your routine. They have all natural whole food ingredients, and they contain naturally occurring MCTs made from coconut oil. There's no artificial flavors, there's no colors or additives, and there's no sugar from highly refined corn syrup. They want me to talk about my love of coffee, but the truth is, I don't do much with coffee. But let me tell you someone who does. My wife has to have a cup of coffee every day. Now, I've fallen off recently, but one of the big things that I've done since the beginning of our relationship is she used to go and get a Starbucks every morning. I have substituted that out by always trying to make her coffee. It's not going to be every single day of time from when I met her, but for the most part, almost every day, I make her coffee. I put her creamers together, and I make sure that she has a good way to start her day. So with Laird, he started experimenting with his morning ritual almost 2 decades ago. He found that when he started adding fats to his morning cup, like coconut oil, he had amazing energy throughout the rest of his day. He gradually perfected this recipe for an epic cup of fuel, and he began sharing it with his friends in the surf community. I'm an ocean guy, so I saw this item and I was like, okay, we're going to try this one out. Are you ready to feel more energized, more focused, and supported? Go to lairdsuperfood.com and add nourishing plant-based foods to fuel you from sunrise to sunset. And you can use our promo code at checkout to save 15% off your purchase today. Our offer code for this for Laird is going to be TrueCrimeXS. Pretty much everywhere except for Labarde Creations, if you use TrueCrimeXS, that will get you, at Laird, it'll get you 15% off. At some of the other places, they'll get you 20%. And the last sponsor I want to tell you about is Zencastr. We are part of Zencastr's creative network. We've been using Zencastr since about midway into our first season. Meg and I experimented with a lot of different ways to put the podcast together. And the truth is, Zencastr, an integral ingredient to us being able to bring you this show. It's so easy. It's now super easy. You can record a podcast with Zencastr. You can log in using your browser and you start recording a high quality podcast right away. You can record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guest. You get to feel a sense of zen knowing that Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you will always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. You sound your best. I mean, if you've ever worried about what you sound like, Zencastr's post-production process makes you sound buttery smooth. It automatically removes those ums and ahs in your recordings. It removes those awkward pauses in conversation too. You can set the right podcast loudness and levels while reducing background noise with a click of a button. That's how you don't hear my dogs every second of every episode. Zencastr is all in one. If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are now over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place, and you can distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. Just go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code TrueCrimeXS, and you're going to get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. You can also check out the other plans they have available. I want you to have the same easy experiences that I do for all my podcasting and content needs. So zencastr.com/pricing. The offer code is TrueCrimeXS, and it's time for you to share your story today. We are also adding New Era as a sponsor for the show. New Era Cap is a headwear and apparel brand founded in 1920 in Buffalo, New York. Now, I actually have some experience with New Era caps. My dad and I have been through multiple iterations of baseball caps through the years. We collect different styles, different eras, and now my teenager has started his own cap collection and has several New Eras as the centerpieces. Our favorite teams may not be the same, but our outfits are all topped with the same New Era ball caps. We love the quality and the ability to wear what the players are wearing. Not to mention, New Era is the leading headwear manufacturer with quality licensed products. You can support your favorite college or pro team in style from the official headwear provider for the MLB, NFL, and NBA. You can get a stylish accessory for your everyday ensemble and support True Crime XS. Just shop the official headwear and get 15% off when you go to neweracap.com. That's neweracap.com/TrueCrimeXS. You can also use the code TrueCrimeXS at checkout. That's it. That's all you have to do. And that's 15% off your order using the promo code TrueCrimeXS.